Hey everyone, and welcome to the second episode in my two-player tank game series. Today I'm going to be going over how to add in the foreground and background. I'm also going to be fixing our zoom issue. If you're excited for today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribe. But anyway, let's get into this tutorial. So in the player 1 and 2, I've replaced the small costume with a costume called Zoom. As you can see here, this thing is humongous. It goes way outside of the border and it's really big. And then the same thing in player 2, as you can see, player 2 also has the zoom costume, and in foreground it's the same as ground, just with different graphics. So I have chunk 1 through 7 and then the small costume. The same exact thing in background. It starts with small and then 0 through 7 chunk, and then last but not least I have clouds, which is the very back layer, with at small and then 0 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 cloud chunks. If you don't want to make these sprites and costumes, then check out the link in the description and I'll have a link to the project where you can get all of my art. Now last episode, if you remember, we couldn't actually zoom out because we were switching to the small costume, which didn't allow. To fix this, just take out the switch costume to small in player 1 and player 2. As you can see now, right away, the zooming actually will work where we can zoom in and out correctly. That's because the specific size of my tank worked. So if your sprite is a different size, you may need to play a little bit with the zoom costume and all that stuff. Now here's the issue. If we zoom out, the tank base is fine, but the actual tank barrels stay big, and that kind of looks dumb. So to fix it, what we need to do is we need to switch costume to zoom inside of this if clone is equal to true. You can see in player 1 the barrel disappeared, and that's because the zoom is so big it won't let us zoom into a bigger size because the zoom is already big. So we need to only do this if we're zoomed out. So to do that, we want to check if the camera zoom is less than 65, then we'll do that. You can see now for player 1 the barrel comes back, but if we go ahead and zoom out, look at that, it gets smaller still. If we zoom in, it gets bigger. So you can see now that this is working correctly. Now we just need to do the same exact thing in player 2. So go ahead and grab this if statement and plop that into player 2 and put that right here. And now if we go ahead and test it, the zooming still doesn't quite work, and that's because I put it in the wrong spot. Wow. Okay, so now you can see that the zooming will work if we zoom in and out, and it all looks correct. Okay, so now that we have the zooming in, let's go ahead and figure out how to generate the world, because right now we are only making one chunk when in reality we have 8 chunks to create. So in ground, let's go ahead and make a new block, name this one create world, and make sure you check this run without screen refresh. That'll make it do it instantly. Now let's find a nice spot for that. Now when I receive clear clones, delete this clone in case there's any leftovers, and then when I receive, we need to make a new message called start game. Now in the start game, create the world. Now we need to actually broadcast the start game, so in the stage you need to add a broadcast start game right underneath the reset. Now it will broadcast that after it reset everything. Now in the ground we need to make a for sprite variable called world width. Then we want to set that world width to however wide you want it. I'm going to set the world width to 5. Now you may be going, well, you actually have 8 costumes. Well, that's because I want there to be some overlap so that way you can't see the edges of the world. So we're going to set the world width to 5. Then we are going to set the, where's my ground? Oh, and also we need to rename the tank X and Y to ground X and Y because that doesn't really fit. So rename the tank X in the ground to ground X, and then the tank Y in the ground to ground Y. Okay, so now we can set the ground X here to negative 480. Now 480 is perfectly one screen, so that's going to make it offset by one screen, so it'll kind of be like right here if you can imagine that. And the ground Y is going to be 0, so it's kind of in the middle of the screen. Now we need one more for the sprite only variable called ID. This will keep track of what costume it should be. So next we'll set the ID to 0. Now all we need to do is repeat the world width plus 2. So the 2 is the overlap here. So the first one is the one from the left for the negative 480, and then the second one is the one over on the right. So now we're going to create a clone of myself. We're going to change the ground X by 480, which remember that is perfectly one screen. So make sure you make your grounds one screen wide, which one screen is literally just this costume window here. So if you do that, all of your grounds will line up. And once we're done, we can change the ID by 1. So let's go ahead and try this and then zoom out. We have our world generating, but the costumes don't quite look good because they're not switching to the correct one. So what you want to do is go ahead and right click on the costume in the ground and delete it. What we do want is switch costume to the ID. Well, that's not going to work because that's going to look for like numbers. So it'll look for 0, 1, 2, 3. But what what we do have is chunk and then the number. So all we need to do is do switch costume to join chunk with the ID, like so. Now, if you named your something different, you're going to have to change it. Say you named it whatever, 0, then test. You're going to want to do join ID with test, and then make sure you name the rest of them. Keep it consistent, otherwise this won't work. And also make sure you start with 0 and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's how our system works. So if we go ahead and do that, you can see that they all have their own unique costume now, and it's not all the same. And another way we can kind of test it is if we go to 0, we can write a 0, and then we go to 1, we can write a 1, and then on 2, write a 2, and then 3. And as you can see here, 0, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those numbers. Now this is looking pretty bad because as you can see, you can actually see the grounds on the edge because they're too far off the screen. So let's go ahead and make them hide if they're off the screen. And we probably need to do that with the tank as well. And if else right underneath it, go to and check if, and now duplicate this and then round that. So just put that all in a round. If the rounded X part of it is equal to the rounded X position. The reason we're rounding here is so that way there's not some weird decimal number, because say the X position is 140 and then the ground X is 140.5, technically that doesn't equal it. So we want to round that. We also want to check the Y part. So and the round Y position equals round. Go ahead and get rid of all this and then duplicate the ground Y stuff. So if those match, that means that we can show. Otherwise, if they don't match, means we're off screen, so we can go ahead and hide. So as soon as we do this, we get rid of that ugly stuff off screen, and now it is seamless. Now let's do the same thing for the tank. So duplicate this and then get rid of the bottom part. Now pull that into the player. Now to conserve resources, instead of putting this at the bottom, because that would mean that both the clone and base will do it, let's just do it in the tank base. And then make sure you change the ground X to tank X and the ground Y. Now you can see that once we zoom in, the tank base will disappear, but the tank barrel won't. The way to get around this is to make a for sprite variable called player1 shown. And now we're going to go ahead and set the player1 shown to all of that. And then pull this if else on the bottom. And now we'll just pull this over here. As you can see now, it'll say true when it's shown, but then if we zoom in, it'll say false. So that's working. Now all we need to do on the bottom is check if the player1 shown is equal to true, then show, otherwise hide. So now you can see that both of them hide once we zoom in far enough. Now let's go ahead and pull this into player2 and then the if else as well. Now put that on the bottom and then the set right here. Now all we need to do is make a new variable called player2 shown, and instead of setting player1 in the player2, set the player2 right there and then check if the player2. So that means that this one is shown. You can now see they won't get stuck on the edge of the screen if we zoom in or out far enough. Make a for the sprite only variable in the ground called isClone. And now what we want to do in the reset loop right here, set the isClone to true. Now we want to go ahead and when I start as a clone, we want to switch costume to chunk 0 just in case we didn't assign one using the ID, and then also set the isClone to true. Oops, I'm sorry. In the reset, we want to set the isClone to false because it's not a clone. Now in this part right here, what you want to do is add an if else, checking if the isClone is equal to true, then we'll do all that. Otherwise, we'll just hide. That way we don't have the actual sprite shown up. Okay, now we can start working on the foreground and background and clouds. So what you're going to want to do is pull every script from ground into foreground. What we want to do is we want to take out this set world width because we only want to do that once. Then we want to set the ground X to -950. So we're going to do quite a bit of overlap in this one. Then we're going to set the ground Y to -250, so it's down at the bottom. Then we're going to repeat the world width +4. And then in the when I start as a clone, we are going to go to front. So you can still see that this isn't working. I forgot to actually pull in the script that calls this a world, so it never actually creates a world. So we want to pull in this when I receive start game and then create the world. Okay, now you can see once we did that, there we go. Look at this. We have a foreground in here. Alrighty, that is awesome. Make sure you add a show in here though. That'll help. Now we want to make this parallax, so that way it won't move the same speed as a camera. If we go ahead and change the scroll X by like 25, you can see that it's perfectly moving with the ground. It kind of just looks like it's plastered on. So let's change that. What we want to do is simply take the scroll X here times 1.2. So that will make the number slightly bigger. Now do that for the scroll Y as well. Take that times 1.2. And then last but not least, instead of taking this minus scroll X, also take it times the 1.2. And then same with the scroll Y over here. So now if we go ahead and change the scroll X by 1 in a forever loop and click on that, it moves a little faster. If we change it by 4, you can actually see it a little better. It's moving quicker. Okay, so let's repeat this process for the background. Pull every script into the background. Okay, so now these scripts are identical for the background. Now in the background, we want to move it slower than the actual ground. So take this times a number smaller than 1. So I'll do 0.7. So it's kind of subtle. Make sure you change it for these two over here. And then instead of going to front, make sure you do go to back here. And then in the create world, we want to set the ground X to -480, ground Y to 25, and then only take this +2. So if we go ahead and start now, here we go. Look at that. The background is moving slower than the foreground. So that's working correctly. And we can actually zoom in and out. Okay, so now we just have one more layer to do. So pull all of these scripts into cloud. And now this one's a little bit different. Let's go ahead and take the scroll X times 0.2 and then the scroll Y times 0.4. Then we want to go ahead and take out everything except the X part. And then make sure you do 0.2 here as well. That'll just affect the parallax a little bit. And of course, you can play around with these values however you would like. Then we want to make sure we go to back here. In the create world, we want to do -960, so that way it's nice and far. We want to set the ground Y to 150. Then we want to repeat world with +4, and then let's test it out. As you can see, the clouds are actually above the background. So to change this, go ahead and move this go to back to the bottom, and then put that in a forever loop. So you can now see that the clouds are behind and it's all layered correctly. So let's add a forever loop and change the scroll X by 1, and you can see that it's all parallaxing very nice. Now there's one more thing that I kind of forgot about, which is the backdrop. So I need to go ahead and backpack that in. Okay, so this is the backdrop that I want. There's like this horizon line, and then the rest is kind of light. This will be in the project below with the art in it. You can see now that the background isn't just white, so it kind of just makes it look a little better. Now that we have that, let's position the tank so it looks like the final scene would actually look like. So for player 1, we want to set the tank X to 0 and the tank Y to -25. So you can now see if we start, there we go, it's kind of positioned right here on the ground. Then for the player 2, we want to set it to the end of the world. Now here's how we can do that automatically without having to figure out what number it is specifically. All we need to do is take the world width -1, then take all that times 480. That way it's actually the green width. And now put that in there, and then set the tank Y to -15. You can see that the tank 2 disappears because it's all the way on the right of the world, and there we go. As you can see here, it's over here. So that is working correctly. But you can see now that this scene is working. And I kind of forgot, but we'll do it next episode, is you can also put a border around your screen so that way it covers up the slight seams on the edge. You can see once in a while it'll kind of peek through. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. Stay tuned for the next episode because we're going to be starting adding in the turns and the shooting and stuff. Anyway, this has been Owen, and I am out.